So I was watching the Goldfish's retrospective on Master System Sonic 1 the other day, and it got me thinking. He claims the 8-bit version of Sonic as something of a forgotten game. And the man isn't wrong. As a channel with a near complete UK Master System collection, it's easy to forget that most people probably played the very different 16-bit version. And if anything, the Master System is even more forgotten than the Game Gear one. We have discussed this before, because you may have heard me rant about Sega's policy of constantly re-releasing only the Game Gear version of Sonic 1, despite my contention it's the Master System one but zoomed in enough to be playable on the low-resolution Game Gear. The only commercial Master System re-release to my knowledge is a digital copy on the Wii that you can no longer purchase. My historic preference for the Master System one has meant that I've never really given the Game Gear a chance. Does the zoomed in perspective actually matter? How zoomed in is it? Is the game altered for this? Are there other differences? I've never really tested any of this, and now is the time. I've recently come by a restored Game Gear and a copy of the game. I do, of course, own several actual Master Systems, and for proper head-to-head testing, I have this cycle-accurate analog SG that can play both the original carts using otherwise identical settings. So let's find out if Sega are right, and see if I can make peace with a game I've always kind of resented for being in the way of Master System Sonic getting the recognition I felt it deserved. Talking about this with some fine YouTubers, Johnny from Re-Enthused remembered the Game Gear version being the quicker one. If we think about it, this makes sense. We're both British, and UK Master Systems, and thus Sonic itself, are going to run at 50Hz stock. There's no reason for the Game Gear to be likewise, and my immediate thought was the Game Gear was a 60Hz machine, given that it was identical in all regions. If we compare the two, we prove the point. For some reason, the attract demos are actually different on the two machines, but if we start them as close as possible, the Master System is mere fractions of a second behind. However, when that Master System demo finishes, they're almost 2 seconds apart. Replace the footage with that from the SG running the Master System 1 at 60Hz, as a US Master System would, then they match back up. We also get the same result comparing the SG running the Game Gear at 60Hz to either the real hardware or the 60Hz Master System footage. In the UK, we suddenly have a much more interesting battle. Sonic is quicker on the Game Gear. If you're determined to do this on stock original hardware, and you live in a territory that used the PAL TV format like the UK, you're suddenly now weighing speed versus viewpoint. If you've got a modded or US Master System, or you're using an emulator, you're almost certainly going to be 60Hz across the board, wiping out that advantage. What won't change is the zoomed in view. So let's have a go. And firstly, let's not pretend it's not really very zoomed in. Let's go back to that intro for a second. This picture is from the exact same place in the first level of both games. I think I'd be generous to suggest you've got about half as much actual real estate in both directions here. That flower just behind Sonic is right on the screen edge of the Game Gear, but there's a whole garden visible on the Master System. That said, Sonic's positioning seems to be smarter. At least here, he's further back on the Game Gear, which does mean in this case you can see forward almost as far as on the Master System, just a single ring less. It's going to be fine until something comes in quick from the left, but that's not a super common scenario in this game. There are more version differences too. The totem pole just has the 2 segments, and the trees aren't as tall as on Game Gear. And that's where things get interesting, because the Game Gear version has been altered in places to make it possible to play on this screen, and in some cases they make a material difference. This is the Green Hill Zone boss on a Master System. He flies back and forth on the screen a bit and then descends one side or the other, where you can get in a few hits and then run for it before he shoots across the screen. Get it really right and you can defeat him in 2 goes. Play safe, you'll still do it in 3. It's a first boss after all. On the Game Gear though, in order for you to even see him for the first 15 seconds of the boss fight, he has to fly considerably lower. So he's actually on the screen. The thing is, you mess with Sonic's movement too much, and you'd have to redesign the entire game. They didn't do this, so Sonic jumps about as far as he does on the Master System. Which means in practice, you can hit Robbie while he's ambling about the top and end the fight before there's even the slightest peril at all. I don't actually know if this is an improvement or not, but it's certainly easier. That's a bit of a pattern. There's a few changes made that end up with the Game Gear being easier. The second boss is different too, for instance. It's not just boss changes either. Here is the one and only automatic scrolling level in Sonic 1. No one likes auto-scrolling levels obviously, and this will not change your mind. But it's a slightly different level on the Game Gear. There's some bridges that fall when you walk on them. On the Master System, some of them are more than the screen in width, and that never happens on the Game Gear. More fundamentally, there's this, a rare vertical level for Sonic. On the Master System it scrolls with you, and if you fall off the bottom of the screen, which you will, you die. On the Game Gear you can scroll back down, and then die because it's not like you can judge this. But again, the Game Gear version is easier. It didn't seem to affect me though. I did a head-to-head using the Analog SG. Same controller, same screen. Forcing the Master System one to 60Hz, my game ended with a few dumb deaths on my first encounter with this level. Switching immediately to the Game Gear, I reached the boss. And then playing the Master System version at 50Hz, about which more later, I also died to that same boss. I hate bosses. No game is ever improved by bosses. There's one other possibility. The Game Gear could play Master System games with a converter. You try that, and you've got a Master System version running at 60Hz on UK original hardware. Sort of. The problem here is that the Game Gear's screen is a lower resolution than the Master System. That's what's caused the zooming to have been used in the first place. With that essentially patched out, there's issues. Firstly, everything is fairly tiny on the Game Gear's screen, and being an early 90s LCD, it had a tendency to smear in motion to the extent that you'd struggle to even spot a surprise enemy. There's also points where the colours go wrong as it attempts to combine pixels, although this is the kind of thing you'd probably only notice if you were looking for it. It's playable, but I don't think this is a game you'd want to try and complete this way on a Game Gear. On a modern handheld, like this RG351P, which you could pick up for about 80 quid, it's obviously a different story. This thing has more than the resolution it needs for the job, so you've got your free choice of version. There's one more question to answer. If you're real hardware, and are playing the Master System version at 50Hz, does it make a big difference? We know that difficulty isn't a major shift when the game is running slightly slower, and neither is anything else really. The music is pretty much the only giveaway. The 8-bit Sonic 1 never hugely relied on speed, and you very quickly just don't notice, even if you've just played two distinct versions at 60Hz back to back. One thing though, there's some reasonably major slowdown on both versions at 60Hz. Is that better at 50? No, it isn't. This is something that doesn't improve until the later games in the series. So yeah, I guess I've made peace with the Game Gear version in its own setting. I still think the Master System one is better, especially once you equalise the speed, but the Game Gear one is more intelligent than I realised. To complete the story, this changes a little with Sonic 2, most notably because of the first boss. It relies on your avoiding the bouncing balls so they hit the boss instead. but they've not altered it, so you really need absurd reactions on the Game Gear to even see the rest of the game. I'm not sure if this is due to the change of developer from Ancient to Aspect, or indeed even what the rest of Sonic 2 on the Game Gear is like, because I'm not sure I've ever got past this to see it. I don't have the Game Gear ones physically after Sonic 2, but Sonic Chaos, the last one with distinct versions for both machines, reportedly makes several concessions to the Game Gear's screen. Sonic Triple Trouble only exists on the Master System as a homebrew conversion that very much uses the Game Gear's code. And Sonic Blast was only published in Brazil for the Master System and is basically the Game Gear version running in a window. Maybe those Game Gear games have a place, especially in handheld re-releases, but that still really doesn't excuse the Master System's absence, even on big boy console releases like the PlayStation 2 collections. If what you have is a Game Gear though, do enjoy 8-bit Sonic. I won't get in the debate if it's better than the 16-bit game, but they are absolutely both great, and it's very different to its big brother. While you head for a debatably legal source that totally isn't archive.org to get you some ROMs, maybe pause to make sure you're subscribed to this fine channel. Hit the bell, and on the last Friday of the month you'll see our main series Yesterzine, where we play the highest and lowest rated games in an old gaming magazine as the most complex setup to a your mum joke in history. See you then!